Welcome to the HOPEcast from Hope Church in Richmond, Virginia, where we have conversations about faith and life in around 30 minutes. My name is Kelly Pious, and I'm joined by David Dwight, our senior pastor. And today we're recapping the Proverbs series, Wise and True, that we just finished up. David, I know that sermon series at Hope are usually planned a number of months in advance, and I'd just love to hear from you. What was your thought process, and how did you settle on the sermon topic and the timing and the decision to start a new year with it?
Yeah, I think the New Year symmetry was kind of a big part of it. The New Year tends to have its own unique thing, sort of in our culture. It tends to be a time of New Year's resolutions. We sort of think about, how am I going to take some steps to be more intentional in my life or try to improve my life or stuff like that. And so there's some symmetry with the Proverbs in that regard. So I think that was probably the biggest piece of it. The other thing, you're like, sermon series get developed months in advance. That's true. I try to pray a lot about these. I have this little part of me that sort of likes to look at the Bible as like, here's a little Bible challenge. Let's see if we can make a sermon series out of some material in the Bible that's a little tricky, a little off the beaten path, maybe a little lesser known, maybe the kind of stuff that people haven't read much or haven't been that familiar with. The most familiar stuff is fun to preach because it's got a lot of easily available content. The less familiar stuff is it's like a challenge to the preacher. And I sort of like that it's like a little whispering challenge in the back of my head. Yeah.
What did you learn about Proverbs, or what did you come away with that you maybe didn't expect going in or was new to you this time?
I think part of why I wanted to do Proverbs, I have appreciated Proverbs over the years. We've talked a good bit in this series about, I'll use the word symmetry again. There's 31 chapters in Proverbs. Most months have 31 days. So the alignment of reading a chapter a day is right there for the taking. I read, and I know that many people have done it, but I read that Billy Graham read one chapter of Proverbs and 5 chapters of the Psalms every day. And there's 150 of the Psalms, so you're getting pretty close to 5 a day over a 30-day month. If you read one chapter of Proverbs and 5 Psalms every single day of your life, imagine the slow immersion of what's happening.
Sure.
You're talking about not doing it once. You're doing it 12 times a year. And how many years did he do that for? I'm going to say, I'll guess he did it for probably 40 years. 12 times a year for 40 years. That content becomes embedded in your perspective. The words become part of the way you think. Proverbs is hard to preach because it jumps around a lot. You get these couplets all the time. And they're not just necessarily a contiguous flow of a similar thought. Right. You get one here, and then you get another, it jumps to a different topic. So it's very different content than normal preaching. And that was a challenge to me. So one of the things that I kind of threw into my sermons was, more or less, we're not going to be able to talk about everything in the Proverbs.
Right.
So I do want to talk about a few important themes that come through. And this time, I think what struck me is the content of the Proverbs and the idea of wisdom being something that we should prioritize at all costs. This is a foreign language to us. And sometimes it's just helpful to say that. So here's part of the challenge, right? Guess what you're going to do? You're going to give sermons in a foreign language. Now, I'm doing it in English, but I think it's a foreign language. Most of us in America are like, what are we talking about? Wisdom? Why does it matter? Why do I care? What difference does it make? I'm scrolling my Instagram and I just want to know how to get a good grade on my test tomorrow, or I want to meet somebody I like. What does this have to do with anything? And it's a foreign language. So literally, it's almost like giving a sermon series in a foreign language. And even underneath that, not only is it a foreign language, but most Americans have a distaste for foreign languages, right? So you're getting that's a double whammy, right? You know the old joke, what's a person who speaks 3 languages, trilingual? What's a person who speaks 2 languages, bilingual? What's a person who speaks 1 language, American? We don't, that even that is a world we're not that conversant with. We don't like it.
Right.
So the whole thing is like, let's stretch. We're going to stretch.
That's great.
Make it a little more personal. I'm having a lot of back issues these days, and I've seen some people about it, and they're like, you just have to stretch like crazy. I hate stretching. First of all, when you really stretch, it hurts.
It's painful.
It hurts. And it's not fun. I can think of so many better ways to use 25 minutes.
Yeah.
So wisdom like stretches our understanding of life and God. And I think that's a big part of it.
Yep. It's great. Gives us some inconvenient truths sometimes. Wisdom. Yeah.
The concept of discipline shows up in wisdom a good bit. What do you think of when you hear the word discipline?
I feel like discipline is something that like I know I need in wisdom. You know, you can like look back to times of your life where you're in a season of discipline about working out or following a diet or being in the Word on a regular basis. You know, I think those structures in place, we know, like I know leads me to a better outcome, but I don't always want to yield my will to the structure. I think our hearts want to be lazy. So it's hard sometimes to embrace discipline, even if we know that the outcome down the road will be helpful.
How about add to that, if I say the word discipline, how does that land with you as a mom with kids?
That's a hard one, I think, as a parent, because you want, again, you know that raising children with discipline or being a person with discipline is going to be a more successful person. But children they're not going to embrace your discipline, right? So you have to offer it in a reasonable way. And I think also there's a bend as a mom of also wanting to have their hearts and to know that I'm with them and that I'm not just trying to be strict and enforce boundary all the time, but that I'm doing it with a heart of love and I want to be in relationship with them too. So there's some balance point there in disciplining them well and also loving and enjoying them well.
That is a kind of a cool insight to me. I was just reading in Hebrews yesterday, and we get phrases like this. No discipline seems, I can't remember the word, it's in and around enjoyable when it's happening.
Sure.
But we grow to understand the benefit in time. Then we have phrases like, God disciplines those he loves. Okay, that's really interesting. And I appreciate you're sort of articulating, well, discipline is important as a parent toward your children to help them become mature. We'll use a general word. But you also mentioned, but you want them to know you love them. So the mom's heart is, and I'm a dad, my kids are grown, but I remember it too. If I discipline the child, the sense would be, I'm bringing about an experience that they don't enjoy for a larger, longer term vision. Yep. But are they going to think I don't love them because I'm bringing about this experience? And isn't it interesting how the Bible just says it this way? God disciplines those he loves.
Sure.
Sometimes trying to understand the Bible, I like to flip words around. And if we flip that around, it would be, if God's not disciplining you, he doesn't love you.
Sure.
If your parents aren't disciplining you, they don't love you. Well, wait, like what? What do we do with that?
Yep. I mean, of course, like, yes, you discipline your children because you want, you know that there's a greater outcome for them, or you have a higher standard and you want them to be able to achieve that by developing the character to be a person that embraces discipline, that, will yield to it. Obviously, in our lives as mature adults, we come up against boundaries and authority figures all the time. And to be a mature person, you have to be able to accept that correction well. And so I think it's just kind of getting your kids to that point and trying to offer it in, not in anger, but in love, just a correction or a redirection to them in a tone and a presentation that's not unkind. It can still be, you can still offer a firm boundary, but with kindness. But that's easier said than done in the reality of daily life as a family.
And the word correction is hard, isn't it? The Proverbs give an idea of discipline a lot with basically the wise person listens to correction. The wise person, I think we get the theme, the wise person even seeks it. The wise person wants another discerning person to speak truth to them, whether it's flattering or hard to hear. The wise person wants that. So one of the ideas in Proverbs is the idea of blindness, being blind to ourselves, that we just, if I could do it like a double negative, we're very good at not being able to see the truth of ourselves. We're like gifted at a bad thing. Right. We're gifted at blindness.
Yeah.
And the Proverbs basically say a wise person wants to avoid the blindness.
Yes.
So when we get corrective words or feedback, generally it hurts.
Yep.
It's hard for us.
Yep.
Why do you think that is?
I think we are blind to our own ego and motives sometimes, and we think that they're probably more pure than they are. But I also think most people are not going into a situation trying to harm someone else, trying to hurt them, trying to do anything to upset them. I mean, I think generally we are not trying to offer that to our friends or our family or our coworkers or whoever it is. And when we do, we feel like, gosh, I was trying so hard. I can't believe you didn't see how hard I was trying a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's our ego kind of protecting ourselves or keeping ourselves from sort of just being open to like, that's not how that person experienced what you were trying to offer. But I think most of the time our defensiveness comes from like, I actually was trying really hard and you're still telling me I was falling short of whatever the situation required.
Yeah.
When you are given that kind of feedback or when you have been in your life, like what are the ways that you have found that's like helpful for you to process it or a godly approach to taking that criticism or feedback and working through it?
So of the sermons that I preached in this series, the one that I got the most response from was when I told a story about a class in seminary where you worked with groups of people and then basically a circle of chairs was made with one chair in the middle. And the professor led a conversation where everybody told you how they experienced you.
That feels brutal to even hear about.
It was brutal. It's actually interesting to think back. I'd be really curious to know if they still have that course today because the cultural underpinnings are quite different today. So when I took that, it would have been 1991. And the first part is the positives, right? So what are some positive ways people experienced you? And then it's what were some difficult ways people experienced you. And I talked about the positives and the negatives that I got back. Back then, I was a lot less experienced with criticism and negative feedback. 35 years of ministry, you get more used to criticism and negative feedback. It was hard to hear what people were saying. And internally, I had this loud defensive voice wanting to say, but you don't understand, but you don't know what I meant, but you're not giving me the benefit of the doubt, but you're assuming I had negative motives. And of course, when you step back from the whole experience, you learn the point of the class was that people's perception is the reality of the experience you have with them. So what's going on inside of you, your intentions, your altruism, whether it actually was or wasn't, you don't get to explain all that.
Sure.
If you work on a team of people at work and people simply experience you the way they experience you. So I remember getting that feedback, and it was painful. But I do remember the light bulb, the big light bulb is, but wouldn't you want to be aware of this?
Sure.
And if you emotionally can say yes to that, which is not an easy yes, then you start opening yourself to, okay, I want that kind of insight, even if it's going to be hard to hear it.
Yeah.
None of us is perfect. None of us is going to get perfect, but I hope most of us are trying to improve with awareness and insight and how to treat other people and how we come across with other people. Then I shared another story that people talked to me about, a time when Hope Church was in a tough season. And from my seat personally, my experience of it was I was getting a lot of criticism, and I was upset and angry, and I was praying to God and, this isn't fair. I didn't bargain for this, and so on. And I used the phrase that my prayer with God was I was just licking my wounds and making God watch. And the thought that I had coming out of that prayer that I have sensed was God helping me with kind of a rigorous statement. David, if there's so much struggle for you with what's happening at Hope Church, maybe there's too much you in your vision. That was hard, but that was an incredibly helpful thing. If we can somehow be us, but not hold the fragile, tender, sensitive places with such emotional strength.
Sure.
And have it, the phrase we use is it's not about you. Mm-hmm. We know that. It's one thing to say that. It's another thing to come to an emotionally settled place with that. So those are some of the places where I heard the most feedback about sort of the blindness, the truth, and discernment and all that.
Yeah.
And the Proverbs are like begging us to try to get unblind.
Right. And I think that's so counter to the culture we live in. You can scroll social media or pick up any, best-selling book, and it's usually, I think we're in a culture that really values therapy and counseling, which is great, and exploring your own emotions. But so many of the pop culture approaches are about blaming circumstances or other people for the situation that we're in, rather than taking on that personal responsibility of like a hard look at your role in the conversation. That doesn't seem to be the leading edge of what's out there.
And once that gets kind of built in, it'll start bringing other train cars coupled with it. So what comes with that is this almost a forceful cultural expression, which is, I am absolutely going to be who I am. I am absolutely going to go after what I feel. Yeah. Like this is in the air. I think you were in a conversation last week, and we had a group of us who were talking about our early years in starting in ministry. A group of us were in a church planting assessment experience, and we were comparing notes. That was also a really rigorous feedback loop. And a few of us were saying, what do you remember about it? And I shared a memory. One of the things we had to do in this experience that was 5 days with a bunch of assessors, you just had to give a sermon, and you had 5 people as a panel listening to your sermon, and they're there with their pencils writing grades the whole time. And this was a long time ago, but it was formative in my preaching. And so when I was finished, they gave me this feedback, and they said the content was great, really helpful, really solid. The delivery was not so great. So I'm like, okay. And then they said the delivery was kind of flat. It needed more passion, commitment, and energy. Okay, it pains me to say this, but it's also actually cathartic to just like get it out. And so I said, well, that's just not who I am, right? Now, in today's culture, that would have been like, yeah, that's not who you are. You're not going to try to be who you're not, right?
That, yeah.
The guy said, if that's not who you are, then get a different job. And that was an eye-opening moment.
Sure.
Right? There was no self-esteem club here. Oh, you're right. We don't want you to not be who you are. It was, that's not who you are, and get a different job.
Yeah.
Those were sobering moments. Sure. So those are like, that's the side of the book of Proverbs. It's like the truth feedback side, which is huge.
Yep.
Then we got this other big idea, which is guard your heart. Guard your heart. It's a huge idea. In fact, it comes with the phrase, above all else.
Yeah.
I hear phrases like that. I'm like, above all else, what does that mean? It means above everything. Well, what's in everything?
Yeah.
Everything's in everything.
Yeah.
Above all else, guard your heart is what the Proverbs are shouting to us.
What do you think that looks like in our lives, guarding your heart? How do you walk? How do you take that wisdom and thread it into the day-to-day of our lives?
My guess would be that different ones of us would find that lands a little bit differently. So I just started reading a book. It's a sidebar, but it connects in, called The Glorious Pursuit by Gary Thomas. And it is about the question of, if we really want to be Christians who take our spiritual growth deeply, we will really embrace this pursuit of developing an inner life and world that is best formed for a deep relationship with God. So that's going to raise questions like, what am I allowing into my inner world? And if I'm going to really guard my heart, let's use the phrase inner world for your heart. If I'm going to guard my inner world, then what do I need to do? Now, I've got a bunch of stuff for David Dwight that I try to do. I almost feel like some of this is like, people are going to be like, you're kidding me. But we just got to say it. There are various things that I don't do, mostly because I can't handle them. Now, does it mean other people can't handle them? I mean, there's a side of me that wants to say, and you should do likewise, but that's not helpful. And yet for me, you and I talked about this a little bit, social media, I can't handle it.
Yeah.
I can't handle it.
Sure.
When I have spent time scrolling social media, what it does to me on the inside, I'm like, David, there's nothing good in that. I can't handle it. So I pretty much stopped social media 2 years ago. Do I ever do a quick scroll on Instagram? Actually, what I would say is there might be times where I'm looking for something specific on Instagram. Somebody might say, hey, did you see so-and-so's post?
Right.
But I don't scroll. It's not because I'm virtuous. I mean, I don't know. It's because I can't handle it.
Sure.
There's stuff in movies and stuff like that I can't do. And so I try to avoid that stuff because I'm asking, what is this doing to my inner world? And how well does that contribute to my relationship with God? So the phrase above all else gets my attention.
Yeah.
Now, different people are in different places in their relationship with God, how they see it, how they feel they're pursuing their relationship with God. I understand that. I wasn't always in the place I'm in now. But I would say now I want to do all that I can so that my inner world is a clean place for a rich relationship with God. So that is kind of what it means to me to guard my heart.
I think that's great. And what that is bringing up for me as you're talking is you have prioritized that above all else. And so the disciplines of not being on social media or paying attention to the media that you're consuming, maybe that gets, you can speak to this, does that get easier over time because you're seeing the result of actually when you are guarding your heart, what it looks like?
I do think it gets easier over time. I mean, really, if we want to talk brass tacks about this, we're talking around words like addiction and these other things, which I think most listeners would have a sense that these are words that come with the studies and the sociological studies of social media and all that kind of stuff, the algorithms, how they're written to keep you in addictive loops and stuff like that. Henry Nouwen is one of my favorite authors, and he had this little phrase. It's not very sophisticated, but it's helpful to me. And he talks about how to grow in your prayer life. And he says, for most of us, trying to be quiet and close out any and all distractions for 2 to 3 minutes is a stretch of a beginning point. But he talks about how you begin to do this and you grow your prayer life. And you begin to be able to focus your heart and your energy so that you're praying for longer and longer amounts of time. He uses the phrase, when you're relatively new at this, 1 million distractions are bombarding your head.
Sure.
And he uses the phrase, they're like a person knocking at your front door. Well, he keeps knocking. And finally, you get up and you go open the door and you let him in. Okay, well, if he knows he gets let in, he keeps knocking. So his little illustration is, the more times he just knocks forever and doesn't get let in, finally, he stops knocking. I don't know if that's from a world of psychiatry or psychology, like bona fide, but like it's really helpful to me.
Yeah.
So yes, there's discipline. I'm not opening the door to that guy. And what is that guy? That guy is, I started praying and I heard my phone ping. I'm going to look and see if I got a text. Like, no, not opening the door to that guy. So then you start putting your phone in another room. It's all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's really helpful.
Like that.
I think it's a good thing to think through. Like, it's an ongoing pursuit. It's an ongoing discipline. And maybe every time it does get easier, but we still have to we're still guarding our heart actively. Like, you don't ever stop guarding it. We don't get to a point where we say, oh, like, I don't have to anymore because I'm so pure on the inside or whatever, you know? So
it's because you use the word discipline again. It's interesting. It's a different use of the word discipline. One of them was kind of what our parents do to mature us and so on. This one was the focused effort that I'm going to put into a desired goal.
Sure.
And I don't know. It's not always helpful to use generalizations, but I sense there is less in our culture about do the sustained, rigorous, focused effort in order to get a goal. We have information immediately available. We have solutions immediately available. The more that happens, the more we're used to immediate availability. And the less acquainted we are with a sustained, focused effort. And the word effort is a big one. Like, yeah, I'm going to have to work.
Yep.
And if that comes to like spiritual growth or other things, I think sometimes we're like, really? I'm gonna do that much work at this? And then we're into interesting questions. How much does it matter to me? All that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about the idea of plans? There's a lot in the Proverbs about plans and wisdom.
Yeah, there is, and we're sort of in a season of hope about talking about plans. So we've been sort of having some of these conversations, and it feels to me the idea of you're like, man plans and the Lord laughs. Like we're called to make plans, but also to hold space in wisdom for the Lord to move and work. I think we can make plans based on the information we have, the circumstances that are in front of us. But then just understanding that like what we can see is this tiny, tiny piece of what God knows and can see. And there's so many variables and things outside of our plans that we can't control. So it's a little bit of like heading in a direction and asking the Lord to kind of come alongside and reveal to us what his will is and what other information we might need to refine our plans over time. So that's sort of what I think think we can do in honoring the Lord and not just waiting, but not also forging ahead without a discerning process.
Another word in Proverbs is vision. That's sort of similar to plans. Like you have a picture of the future of what you'd like to pursue. Plans are kind of the steps you're going to take to get there. This is always interesting, right? Because on the one hand, the Bible for sure makes it clear things like this. Psalm 24 starts, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." So we're like, okay, that's pretty clear. We didn't do it. We didn't make the resources. We didn't supply what was needed. God did all of that. On the other hand, we don't do nothing. We actually do have a participating place in it.
Right.
I can think over the years of leadership where sometimes I've been uncertain how to find this. Like, let's just say Hope Church, we're 26 years in. This was a church plant. It didn't exist before 26 years ago. Okay, and so absolutely we would say God has done amazing, faithful, beautiful things at Hope Church. 100%, right? Now, sometimes there would be some people who would say, well, David, God has done everything. And honestly, I'm like, a bunch of us have done something.
Right.
A bunch of us have done something.
Right.
Like and now, we got a whole bunch of people who make Hope Church.
Sure.
Whether you're staff or volunteer or whatever, a whole bunch of people do something. So it's not like we've done nothing.
Yeah.
And people give time, energy, sacrifice to do things to help it work. So it's real interesting, right? Because I think we sort of feel like we're supposed to say God did it all. Mm-hmm. Well, at the very ethereal level of supply, resource, faithfulness, yes.
Sure.
But what's really interesting, and I can't recall it right now, one of the Psalms ends with the prayer, Lord, establish the work of our hands. Really interesting. Establish the work of our hands. So that's an interesting balance point. Generally, I think, even if you go back to Genesis and creation, because of how God's designed it, and because I think what we learn about his heart, I think God wants it to be in us.
Yeah.
I think he wants to be together in it.
Right.
It's like we've shared this analogy. If you're home baking a cake, and one of your daughters says, Mom, can I help? You're thinking, okay, here's the reality. It's going to go slower. It's going to be messier, and we might not get as good a result.
Right.
But you value the together even more than the expediency of how you could have done it yourself.
Right.
And I think God wants it to be in us.
Yeah. Fully agree.
So
he is a God of creation. That's what he does. He creates, and he lets us partner with him in that. And so when we're making plans for good and serving the church or our families or whatever, he is letting us cooperate with him in that.
Right. How about, I don't know how much energy you were able to give to the Proverbs, but what's one or two themes or ideas in the Proverbs that you read that you thought, oh, that's a hard topic?
I mean, I think I'm like a lot of folks who gave you feedback, just the idea of looking hard at ourselves and really having that self-reflective moment to work on our own character and our own responses. In the past couple of weeks, we had a frustrating evening at home, and one of my kids said to me, well, Mom, I need to tell you something. You're not mean, but you're not really that nice. And I was like, hey, thank you for saying that. And I wanted to honor a kid's decision to be honest, but it also gives me something to work on. And I, probably because of this series, I just thought I have to respond well in that. I want to honor her feedback, but also wow, that keeps giving us opportunities to seek out observations about ourselves.
Thanks for saying that. That's kind of a vulnerable thing to share. I've got my own versions of these kind of stories. Part of my invitation, my hope when we're speaking these messages to our whole church was to say, look, if we can all agree that we all have weaknesses and shortcomings, if we all just agree, that's just the baseline.
Sure.
then how beautiful would it be for us to be able to encourage and grow together without quite so much fear that somebody might identify a weakness in me.
Sure.
One of the themes that I mentioned, just as one of the themes, it's actually got like 3 chapters, is the concept of adultery and warnings about adultery. And this would not be the kind of thing you would hear much in our modern American secular culture.
Sure.
Now, when the Bible gives us warnings, it's to protect us. When God says to avoid things, it's for our flourishing and our well-being because of his love for us. But the big idea to me with adultery is, I think the Proverbs are sort of exposing, once you begin to slide into a relationship that's risky, you start being deceived by thinking, I can pull this off without causing much pain. Mm-hmm. And I think the Proverbs are like, that's not true.
Sure.
The cost, the pain, the fallout will be massive. And that's a big topic. Like, you can tell I'm a little nervous talking about it. It's in there. It's very prevalent in chapters 5, 6, and 7. But back to the idea of discipline, discernment, et cetera. When God speaks these truths to us, it may be a little bit hard to hear. They're because he loves us and because he wants to protect us and he wants our lives to flourish.
Sure.
Not only our individual lives, but here's a piece of the Proverbs. They have social implications. They affect other people.
Right.
I think God and Scripture speaks to us about life more with who I am as a person whose life intersects and impacts other people.
Sure.
American culture is so individualistic that we don't think that much about that. We just think, what does this mean for me only? The Bible has a lot more of the social implications of my interconnectedness with a lot of other people.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think adultery is like a great example of that. When you see, if there's a marriage that breaks up because of adultery, the fingers of that go far beyond even the people just in the marriage. If they have children, if they have a network of friends, we all can all think of examples of that where that it hits really, really hard. And I think it's probably just a great reminder that our sin, no matter what it is, does not stay contained just to us. It has implications for the people that we're in relationship with, kind of across the board.
How about questions have been given to us, which I think is fun, but I think you might be better at it than I am. We're sort of coming to the end here, and it's like, what's some advice and wisdom you heard when you were? How about if we go back and forth here? Because there's like 8 of these.
Okay.
So what's some advice and wisdom you heard when you were in middle school?
Oh, boy.
Wasn't that long ago, Kelly.
I like to think that. Yeah, my mom would always prompt me to make sure you say thank you to whoever, if you're going to spend time with a friend's family, or just it was always like a prompt of manners when you were going out of the house to make sure you say thank you, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. Just like a reminder to be a gracious guest or friend.
Okay.
High school.
This is a little weird, but it's sort of funny how a little piece of wisdom hits you. And at the time you're like, all right. And then you're like, well, there's really a lot to that. I remember I had an Algebra 2 teacher, and math was always a bit of a struggle for me. So I'm working through Algebra 2, and I went to see the teacher after class, one of those, hey, can you get extra help moments? And the teacher said, David, as you're working through these formulas, order matters a lot. You have to get these in the right order. You have to move through these in the right order. And I'm like, okay, I get that. And then he said, that's true in life too. Getting the steps in the right order matters a lot. And I remember, I was probably 15. I remember thinking, I think he's saying a lot there. I'm not totally sure what he's trying to get at. And now I'm like, I have great appreciation for what he was saying.
You're like, thank you. I'm just trying to pass this next test.
That's right. Can you just tell me the answer, please? Okay. How about in college?
In college, I don't know if this is advice as much as I had a friend who would say to older people, what advice would you give me in this stage of life? And people, of course, are like delighted to give you advice, but I think you get a lot of like good direction and sort of like our wisdom wall in this series. Like there's a lot of perspective and like, I wish I'd done this differently looking back. So I think just maybe the piece of just like being someone who seeks that out will garner you a lot of good direction along the way. When you were a young adult, anything stand out?
Yeah, I mean, again, I feel so insecure because I'm like, these matter to me, whether I say them and they mean anything to anybody else. I have always been a person who's been impatient for results. And I've always had sort of a picture and vision of life, and I want it to happen fast. It's a simple little phrase, but I remember a conversation with someone and the old phrase, Rome wasn't built in a day. This begins to develop as you step by step by step, you patiently are doing the building blocks, and over time, you take one step and you take one more step, right? It's a little bit like the other one, right? Every great journey starts with a single step. Yeah. Same basic idea. For me, for a person who has big ideas and I'm impatient to see them accomplished, that was helpful for me.
That's good.
Okay, starting a family.
Parent the child you have, not the one you wanted or thought you were going to have. And the second piece of that is that your baby didn't read the book. So, you have kids, and especially when they're really young, you're reading all these baby books and toddler books, and like, this is how we're going to discipline them. This is how we're going to potty train them. They didn't read the book. They don't care about your methods. You're in this with this kid, and it's, again, looking back, I can say it's much more about the relationship that you have with your child than with following the 3-step foolproof method to get them to do whatever you're trying to get them to do.
Let me see if I heard this right. Love the child you have, not the child you think you have?
Yeah, and I think that's part of it too. Like you have this little baby and you can just think, this, our eldest is a boy. He's going to be just like my husband. He's not. He actually has a whole personality of his own, which is very obvious when you're further down the road. But the things that you think might work or the ways that you think this child might show up in the world is really different than who they are. It's baked in. I'm
just going to pile on and say that's massively important, significant, beautiful advice. I never heard it quite like that. I totally get the concept. But that's huge. Yeah. That's a little bit like love the child for who God's made them to be, not for who I want them to be.
100%.
Same idea, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You might do these next two, parenting middle and high schoolers. I'm not quite there yet.
Go for the heart. The heart and the heart-connected relationship is what we're hoping for. Keep the long game in mind, which is a heart-connected relationship. And my wife Elizabeth would say to me something like, listen to the story. So like if I was frustrated with one of my kids, she'd say, listen to the story. It doesn't mean that after you hear the story, you may not still have the frustration, right. but don't have the frustration and forego listening to the story.
Right. Hear their heart. Give them a chance to.
Right.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay.
Our last category.
You don't get.
I don't do this on newly empty nesters, or you have maybe not new at that, but.
Yeah. We're a few years into empty nesting. Yeah. I do think this has big cultural implications. I read an article last week that said there is a rising category in the counseling world, which is empty nest counseling. Couples who really, really need help to know how are we going to do our life now. Yeah. And a lot of that, I think, comes from cultural influences. When we have taught marriage content, which we've been in and around a good bit, we elevate the idea that in the Bible, the first people are Adam and Eve, and they're joined in a marriage covenant. Mm-hmm. There's nobody else there yet. There's no parents, there's no kids. And from this, with other supporting stuff, we say cultivate a marriage-centered family rather than a children-centered family. Yeah. Okay, that's about as countercultural a thing as you can say in suburban America today.
Sure.
Cultivate a marriage-centered family rather than a children-centered family. It would be an hour to unpack what that's all about. But if you do that, you're pursuing your marriage relationship, our friendship, our love for each other, our shared interests, and all of that. If we're doing that, when our kids go off to their next steps, whatever it may be, we have us because we had continued to have us.
Right.
If we jettison us to pursue everything for our kids in a child-centered family, again, it's not that we don't love our kids like crazy. We do. It's just a question of which is the center point. Yeah. If we made our whole family about the kids, when the kids are gone, then we're like, we really don't know what to do. Yeah. It's a big transition, no doubt. We tried to do a marriage-centered family, and it's a big transition even so.
Sure.
But I think that's probably what I'd say for the empty nesters.
That's great.
What was your favorite snippet of advice from the Wisdom Wall? This was where we invited people who are 70 or older to write wisdom. What was your favorite one?
One that just sort of sticks out to me is that someone said, when someone's telling you a story, just let them have that moment with their story. Don't jump in with yours. And I think that's just, I see that happening a lot. I can tend to do it. You're doing it because you want to be relatable to them. You're connecting like, oh, I've been there too. But we can kind of squelch somebody else's moment. And so just like letting them have that, I'm like, yeah, that sounds crazy, hard, whatever. Was a good one.
That's oh yeah? Let me tell you what happened to me.
Our trip was even worse. Yeah. What about you? Anything?
There is a bunch of stuff on that Wisdom Wall that I appreciated. Probably because of what you said, similar but different was listen to the whole story. There's probably always more to the story. Sure. That's really helpful to me.
Yeah, very good.
All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We're so glad you've been with us with the HOPEcast, and we look forward to joining you next time. You can find us on all the podcast platforms, Apple, and all the other stuff. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you.